Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran, is back in New York City. The rituals of his yearly visit are now familiar. He speaks to members of the press, he holds breakfast meetings, and a lot of other meetings at the United Nations. He addresses the UN General Assembly. His trip is often accompanied by developing events. This year was the release of the American hiker Sarah Shord, while the two other hikers, Shane Bauer and Joshua Fatal, remain in an Iranian jail accused of espionage. Iran has now been sanctioned 4 times by the Security Council for its failure to comply with the UN nuclear investigative agency, the IAEA. The Obama administration, Europe, Japan, and even some Arab nations have followed with some additional sanctions. Some are very clear that a military strike should remain on the table if the sanctions do not work. One of those is former Prime Minister and Mideast envoy Tony Blair. If sanctions fail, we have to make a military strike. It's inevitable where you are.
You can't take that option off the table. Let me put
but
it
that's
like that.
easy talk.
I
You
know,
can't
I know,
talk. You're
I know.
saying that if sanctions fail, and I think they're going to get the weapon, we have to bomb them.
Well,
what? I mean,
well,
isn't it a leader's responsibility to face up to the hard question and tell you what he would do?
It is. It is. And I don't know the nature of the military action you would take, but I agree. If in the end sanctions fail, diplomacy fails, I do not think it is acceptable for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And I think you can't rule out military action, and indeed it would come to that if they continue, and sanctions and diplomacy simply can't work.
This is my 5th interview with President Ahmadinejad. Each one has been for an hour. One was in Tehran, and 4 have been here in New York. It is not an easy interview, and sometimes the questions are more important than the answers. He is a controversial figure and has said even more controversial things. And the events after the 2009 election have raised many questions. But the conversation about Iran and its relationships with other countries and its own people is very important. I spoke to him today at his hotel in New York. Here is that conversation. Tell me what you hope to accomplish and where you see Iran at this moment in terms of threatened sanctions, the government of Russia, China, the United States, Britain, and even in your own country. They say it's no joke. Mr. Rafsanjani said, former president, no joke, could hurt Iran. Iranian business people say, this is no joke, it could hurt Iran.
Did you
take what Mr. Rafsanjani says seriously?
I should not take Mr. Rafsanjani seriously?
But have you? Did you?
Yes.
Very good. Which says that there's freedom in Iran to say what they want. So, you know, there's no such restrictions on what people can say in Iran. I believe, responding to your question, that those who resorted to the sanctions really feel that they have no other alternatives, are unable to explore other alternatives. And despite Mr. Rafsanjani's statement, the reality on the ground about sanctions does not change. Naturally, there are people with different opinions on the question of sanctions. But in the end of the day, the reality about our nation is that it believes that sanctions is old-fashioned and a policy that belonged to decades ago. Now, should there be any hesitation about my statement, I would suggest that we wait a couple of months or for a while and see indeed if it has the stated impact that it was desired to have. If it's regarding us, I'm telling you that we don't see a problem with the sanctions.
You seem to be saying your economy is just fine. There are no problems. Everything's great. We can handle sanctions. There's no protest. Everything is well. Is that the picture of Iran that I should have?
From the
day the sanctions are passed, our stock market alone has shown a growth of 20 to 22%. What does that indicate? It points to an active economy. dynamic economy. It points to the fact that there are investments in the country. So the stock market has grown. The Union of Stock Markets has announced that Iran's stock market is the most active in the world and the most successful. So if Iran's economy is so bad, where is all this money and investment coming from? Iran last year was sixth in terms of attraction of foreign direct investments. Now, having said that, I am not at all arguing that we don't have problems, but what I'm saying is that we need to put it in perspective. Everybody has problems. Just look at this country. Look at the United States with the numerous problems it has. But we feel we're still ahead of the game in Iran. Now, we're speaking of sanctions, and I am telling you that you must rest assured that these sanctions have been a blessing in disguise because it has forced us to double the rate of our productivity, and have no doubt that this is inherent in our spirit. The more enemies we feel we have, the more united we become, the harder we work.
What do you think the purpose of the sanctions is?
Well, I think this question should be asked by those who impose the sanctions on us.
But I'm asking you. I'll ask them a later date.
I think that those people do not really understand the world. You see, sanctions and resolutions is one entity, and what happens on the ground is a totally different thing. At least 9 people out of the 15 members, let's say, told us personally that they were pressured, that they do not personally believe in sanctions, but that they were pressured. So what's the point? If you feel pressured, then what you do is ineffective. I'm telling you a reality. You and I speaking here about sanctions is not going to alter that reality. The reality is what it is.
Here's what could alter the reality. If you were more forthcoming, you and your government was more forthcoming about the development of nuclear power and the development of the capacity to make nuclear weapons.
You see, don't you feel like people who make these kind of statements should offer some evidence? Now, in the judicial system in the United States, I'd like to inquire that if you have a complaint, aren't you supposed to offer evidence?
The IAEA says, that they have the evidence, and you have later disclosed things. And secondly, they say that you do not give them the access that's necessary in order to make and provide the evidence that you are or you are not.
You see, the inspectors of the IAEA would have access to our facilities within the framework of the law about it. And as you know, we have cameras installed in our nuclear facilities that also watch every single activity done. Now, if there are any requirements beyond what we are able to deliver and should deliver by international law, that we are not required to do. When these statements and requirements that are extra are made, what becomes clear is that they're politicized. Everybody knows that we do not seek to have a bomb. If we were trying to find a bomb, they would be changing how they talk to us. Now pay attention. They would put their guns down. They would submit to the fact that Iran has become a nuclear weapons country. The fact that they know that we don't have it allows them to go about saying what they want. Now, when Saddam Hussein attacked us during the Iran-Iraq war, did Iran possess a nuclear bomb? If not, why did the United States back Saddam Hussein in attacking us? What had we done exactly? I'd like to ask this question now. This year in New York, the NPT review meeting happened a few months ago at the United Nations, and at the same time, the IAEA decided that the Zionist regime must accept the MPT and allow inspectors from the agency to go there. Have you read of any news recently telling you that those inspectors have gone in while it possesses nuclear bombs? And who gave and equipped that with the nuclear bombs? We have clear evidence that the United States did it, that it equipped the Zionist regime with nuclear bombs. A regime that does not fall under the purview of the IAEA at all. No supervisions have been done. How about the United States? Have anybody supervised or inspected the nuclear arsenal here in the United States? Remember that the IAEA statute says that when it speaks of disarmament, everyone must disarm. Secondly, everyone must enjoy peaceful nuclear energy. And third, that proliferation must be stopped. Now, what has the IAEA done in terms of disarmament? Nothing.
So?
The countries that have veto power have, in the meantime, done nothing too about it. It's quite natural. It's politicized from the very foundation of it. And now they don't like us and what we represent, and they feel that the nuclear issue is one excuse to put pressure on us. But they're wrong. The time for that is gone and passed.
Fair enough. And who do you mean by the Zionist regime?
A regime that has occupied Palestine and now forces its rule on that territory.
Why don't you
That's quite clear.
But why don't you just say Israel? Why don't you say the state of Israel rather than Zionist regime?
We do not recognize that entity. We consider it to be a Zionist and racist regime that usurps, occupies, creates wars, terrorizes, and destroys the homes of people and prevents people from accessing water, medicine, and food in their own homes, attacks its neighboring countries, and threatens everyone around.
So you would therefore hope that there is an agreement reached between the negotiators from the state of Israel and the Palestinians so that they can agree on borders and agree on all the issues that separate them so that those questions can be settled in this negotiation.
Do you feel that a solution will really be found? Honestly, as an expert who's been watching this issue for a long time, do you think there will be a solution? How many times have there been talks like this before? Numerous times. How many peace plans have been put on the table so far for Palestine? Many. Why have they failed? Have you ever asked yourself? Why has there no solution been?
We could go through it, but why do you think they failed?
If we do not address the root cause of the problem, it's as though a patient goes to the physician and is prescribed medicine without knowing what's wrong with the patient. Now, the medicine makes it worse. Those who want to sit down and talk must make it clear who they represent. First,
Palestinian Authority represents the Palestinian people.
Second, were there any elections there? When did the Palestinian people announce their will? When have they? Only one place, and that was in the formation of the Hamas government. The government that came to power through the election of the people, but was then sanctioned by the United States and European governments, the very groups that herald and claim to herald and speak of democracy. Now, don't you think that unless the 5 million refugees return to their country, that the Palestinian issue will be resolved? As long as Palestine's national right to sovereignty is not recognized, do you think that that solution will be resolved? It's not the case that Iran opposes the negotiations. It's that we understand that these negotiations are not going to resolve the issues. We've said that many times. Do you know what the formation of a Jewish state means?
What?
تجربه نشون میده.
Yes.
60 سال تجربه است.
We've had 60 years of experience about it. A Jewish state means a racist regime. It means at least another million displaced people and refugees. It means another war, probably. Have no doubt. A million non-Jewish people living outside the Jewish state. Creating a Jewish state means that a new group of refugees will have to leave, at least 1.5 million of them, I would argue.
When I talked to Mr. Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, he said one of the impediments to create an agreement with Israel was the state of Iran, and your activities stood in the way of them reaching an agreement.
What impediment?
What
impediment? Is our statements an impediment? Are we not allowed to speak our mind? Has this freedom of speech not been granted to us? We'd like to say what we think. We like to argue and debate about it.
I am so happy you raised that question, because I want to come back to your own state. What's the status of Mr. Mousavi and Mr. Karoubi today?
Allow me to say one additional sentence about the previous discussion we had. The argument made that Iran prevents peace in Palestine resembles the argument that is made in Iraq or in Afghanistan by the invaders. Whenever they face defeat, they blame it on Iran, and not once do they step back and think, oh, have we done something wrong ourselves? We're telling them what they've done wrong, and they don't want to hear it. But now going to your question.
The United States has not blamed Iraq, has not blamed Iran for Afghanistan or Iraq.
Numerous times in numerous statements.
They have said that some forces within Iran have supplied ammunition and weapons to some forces in Iraq, but they have not blamed Iran for Afghanistan, not for Afghanistan. And in fact, you have frequently said to me that the Taliban was your enemy.
True, but as far as the first part of your statement is concerned, I think we need to sit down and talk about this. I have heard interviews of U.S. officials numerous times saying that Iran is preventing progress and that Iran has led to the defeat in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, I don't want to speak of the areas of discord right now, but let's speak of what we agree on.
Okay, that's what I would like to do. Let me just speak to the question of dissent in Iran. Are there activities of Mr. Karoubi and Mr. Mousavi restricted?
I think that there are two issues that I need to raise here and clarify. I think that in Iran, there's a lot of freedom at very high levels that I'm speaking of, in fact. Now, the gentlemen you speak of were candidates in the last elections, and they did not receive the sufficient votes. Logically, when you don't receive enough votes, you have to at least respect those who were voted into office, and that's what democracy means. They did not show respect to the vote casted by the majority of the people, and they created problems for themselves. But yet they were free to do it. They were free to do it even so.
What problems did they create for themselves?
Well, if you invite people to rise, to clash, to create conflict, what does that mean? To insinuate so that people start killing policemen, do you think that's the right thing to do? Policemen were killed.
But
now, if you encourage that...
It is also said that protesters were tortured and killed in prison.
Allow me. It is, well, yes, when you encourage people to do illegal acts, to clash with the police, say, in the United States, if somebody clashed with the police and killed them, what would be done? Would that person be encouraged to go on doing what they did?
No. I mean, that's a fair point. I mean, they would not be encouraged to do that. No one is encouraged to kill policemen. No one is encouraged, and if, in fact, there is a...
And that's exactly what happened in Iran. But unfortunately, Western media and some authorities in the United States started hooraying them and encouraging what was happening and showed support. Now that too has passed.
But can't you...
But still, they were free to go on what they were doing, and they have been free. They're still living their daily lives. And here and there might be a problem. And when it does happen, the judiciary will take place of it. They too can go to the judiciary and ask judges to take care of the cases.
So you were saying that
and remember, the judiciary and the judge is independent of me.
Fair enough. But you are saying that Mr. Mousavi and Mr. Karoubi, they are not being subject to any more investigations, and they can do whatever they want to express their ideas.
You added one word to what I said, actually. I did not say whether there was any investigation done or not. That is not that relates to the judiciary and the judge. If there is a complaint that is filed, it goes through the judicial system, and that's the system that has to respond to it. This has nothing to do with the general political environment in the country now. In the country, somebody might file a complaint against me, and it's my duty to go before the judge and respond, because according to our Constitution, all people are equal before the law, and nobody has any rights more than others. But the 2 points that I'd like to raise here are that, first, I am surprised that when American officials who claim to believe in democracy and attack Iraq in the name of democratizing the place and kill hundreds of thousands of people. Hundreds of thousands of people are killed there as a result. When they speak of democracy, are they speaking of the will of a majority or a minority? It seems to me that democracy for these people means their own interests. Whenever their interests serve them, they'll back the minority if they want to. And they call it a democracy. If not, they'll call it undemocratic. In Iran, most people actually voted in the elections and chose who they wanted as the president. And so if you claim to be democratic, you have to back the majority. This is the one issue that I wanted to raise here with you. The second point I'd like to make here is that do you feel that when you restrict things here in the United States, can it be acceptable here but not elsewhere? Say if something were to happen here in the United States, it'll be just fine. But if it were to happen in another country, but not be just fine, the same thing, do you think that's right? Because that speaks of an embedded discrimination of mentality that we want to oppose. Now, there have been people serving in the White House maybe 50 years or so before, or even more recently, but were fired just because of speaking their point of view or their opinion. Now, if this happened in our country, oh my God, people would just go on making so much fuss over it. Now, I'd like to give you another example. Just 2 nights ago, we had an interview with one of your colleagues. I had heard previously that Ms. Clinton had made a statement, that American officials had made some statements saying that a lady in Iran is about to be executed.
Right.
And they united and rallied behind a woman who is about to be executed in Iran. So what was the story?
What was her name?
A lady. A lady.
What's her name?
You have this in your question, so let's not go further deeper in this. Miss Mohammadi.
Okay.
Yeah. I know that it's there in your questions, in your list of questions to ask. Now, what is the case here, the case that Ms. Mohammadi has? Ms. Mohammadi has been accused of being an accomplice to the murder of her husband. The court is taking care of the case. The final sentence has not been issued. The final verdict is not yet out. It is still in process. Now, there's so much noise around the world, the rallies, oh my God, a woman is about to be executed in Iran, but yet, allow me, right now, as we speak, an American lady called Ms. Teresa Lewis in Virginia, has received 7 years, has been in prison 7 years, and will be executed in 3 days on charges of killing her husband. Now, the physician has said that she has psychological problems, but the judge disagreed.
You have done your research well, but let me stay with you, because this is even more interesting than the fact that this woman, you are opposed to stoning, are you not? Just as a matter of humanity, as a matter of humanity, you're opposed to stoning anybody.
As far as Ms. Sakineh Mohammadi is concerned, there was no sentencing by stoning. She was an accomplice to the murder of her husband, and as such, she has a case. Now, someone in Germany claimed that she's about to be stoned. That was fundamentally untrue. Our judiciary, too, has denied that. However, the U.S. propaganda just won't let go. So I'd like to ask that you pass the name of Ms. Teresa Lewis and Ms. Sakineh Mohammadi and take it and Google both names or whatever search engine there is and see how much information you'll get about Ms. Mohammadi versus the other. Now, if you're a human being, you're a human being everywhere. I want to also tell you something else. A list of 53 American women on death row. I mean, basically, I am against any form of murder, killing, execution. This is my personal view of the issue.
So, therefore, you would not like to see this. You would not like to see her executed, and you would not like to see her stoned to death, for sure.
Anyone. I do not like to see it.
So
anyone.
The easy answer to my question would have been: the president of Iran is opposed to stoning. Yes? Yes?
You're speaking for me too. That's really interesting. You're speaking for me, huh? I am just speaking of punishment. I principally, but let me just say.
Principally, you do oppose it.
I disagree that people should be injected with poison or electrocuted.
Fair enough.
But
and how about hanging?
Have a law.
How about hanging?
Anything. We don't like to see these things happen. I don't even want to see an ant, killed, let alone human beings. But you have your laws, and these things do happen, and there are 53 women on death row. I'll give you the list. 53 women, American, on death row.
We understand that.
On death row, death. Death is death. Whether with a shot, and sometimes they cut the head with a, they cut off the head, basically. With a big sword, with a sword, and places that are very good friends with the government of the United States, by the way, but we don't hear any of this. If you go and Google them, you'll hear nothing about those cases, and Ms. Clinton doesn't even take a position on it. I mean, a sword in front of the TV, in front of the cameraman.
Are you talking about Islamic states?
No. خیلی جا هستن.
Would you like me to tell you one scene that happened in Iraq? The video is out there. I can give it to you. American officials in Iraq standing with guns, and there's a terrorist.
همونجا
kills 120 people. Nothing. Ms. Clinton doesn't seem to say anything about it.
Speaking of Mrs. Clinton, I'm going to come back to human rights, but I have to do this because you talk much longer than I do. Here is what the Secretary of State said. She didn't say this, she warned of growing power of the military, that elected officials, that would be you, turning to security forces to enforce their authority. She said, Secretary of State of the United States, I can only hope that there will be some effort inside Iran by responsible civil and religious leaders to take hold of the apparatus of the state.
یعنی ایشون از مخالفین دولت حمایت میکنه.
So is she defending
این
those
درسته؟
who oppose the government? Is that a right
این
thing to
چطور
do?
مسئولیت
What
پذیری در
kind
مسئله
of
المللی؟
responsibility
از
is that at the
مخالفین یک دولت
international
قانونی
level
که
to
با رأی
support
مردم اومده
the
سر کار
opponents of a
حمایت
legal
میکنه.
government that came to power through the
بعده
vote
که
of the people? That's pretty,
اینجوری میشه دنیا رو
bad.
اداره کرد.
Can you run the world like that?
واقعا اینجوری من
Can
به
you
عنوان
really?
دوست
Can you? I mean, as a friend,
ما با هم دوست
we're
شدیم.
friends now.
واقعا اینجوری
Really,
میشه
as a
دنیا رو
friend,
اداره
can you
کرد.
really expect to run the world properly with that
یک
kind
کشوری
of
انتخابات
mentality?
گذاشته.
There is an
85%
election in the
مردم
country.
شرکت
85% of the people go
بالاترین
to
نصاب
vote.
دموکراسی.
The highest level
یه
of
دولت با
participation in
اکثریت
terms of
قاطع رأی
democracy in
آورده.
elections, and a
بعد خانم
government receives an
کلینتون از
absolute
مخالفین
majority
این
and comes to
دولت
power.
حمایت
And
میکنه.
Ms.
چرا؟
Clinton is supporting
هیچ چه
those who
نفعی برای
oppose the
آمریکا
government.
داره؟
Why? What interest does
واقعا
that bring
خانم
to the
کلینتون
United
فکر
States?
می‌کنه
Is
این
Ms.
حرفاش
Clinton
به نفع
really
آمریکاست؟
thinking that what she says is
من
in
به
the
شما
interest of
اطلاع
the
میدم به
United
عنوان
States?
یه
I
دوست.
want to tell you as a
به عنوان
friend,
یه
just
دوست.
inform you as a friend.
این حرفا به ضرر آمریکاست.
These things do not serve the
چهره
interests of the
آمریکا رو در
United
دنیا
States.
خراب
It mars
می‌کنه.
the image of the
به
United
عنوان
States
چهره
in the
غیر
world
منطقی.
Okay.
because it
دخالتگر،
shows the irrational side of
مداخله‌جو،
the United States that seems to
مخالف
be
دموکراسی.
interventionist, that seems
شما از
to
نظرسنجی
oppose
خاورمیانه خبر
democracy.
دارید.
Now you know the polls in the Middle
نظرسنجی
East. You
خاورمیانه.
know the polls in the Middle East and what they say.
آخرین نظرسنجی
The
دقیق که یکی
last
از دانشگاه‌های
exact
آمریکا
poll
اینو
done
انجام
by
داده
an
و رو
American
سایتش هست.
university, which you'll find on its site
به
as
مردم
well,
گفتن دو تا
has
کشور
told
خطرناک تو
two
دنیا رو
questions
بگید.
were asked. Name two dangerous countries in the world.
88%
88% said the Zionist regime. First,
دوم دولت
second,
آمریکا
the
77%.
government of the United States, 77%.
Okay.
Why is that the case?
به خاطر همین دخالت.
Because of all these interventions.
چرا دخالت
Why
می‌کنن
did
تو کار
they
دیگه؟
intervene in other
On the
people's
level
affairs?
on the level of the conversation that you just suggested, may I just say the following? In anticipation of coming to see you, which I said is the 5th interview that we have done, the thing that people most wanted me to talk about was human rights violations. I am telling you that there is a strong feeling that your government and the Revolutionary Guard are violating human rights in an increased way.
جایگاه ما که داره میره بالا حالا.
Where our status in the world is rising.
جایگاه فقط دولت آمریکا نیست.
The status of the world does not belong to the
ببینید،
United
ممکنه ما
States
چشممون رو
government alone,
واقعیت‌ها
Mr.
ببندیم.
Rose. You see, we can choose
خودمون
to
دوست
close
داشته
and
باشیم که
shut our eyes
واقعیت‌ها
to
اونجوری که ما
realities
می‌خوایم باشه.
and perceive reality the way
هی
we'd
اعلام
like
کنیم.
to and keep speaking about it
واقعیت‌ها
and
با نظر
announcing
ما تغییر
it.
نمی‌کنه.
The reality on the
واقعیت
ground
واقعیته.
doesn't change because the reality, the
واقعیت اینه
fact
که
is
ایران
a
امروز
fact. And the
جایگاهش خیلی
fact
جایگاه
is that
برجسته است.
Iran enjoys a
هم
very
در
high
منطقه هم در
status in the
جهان.
world, both in the region that it resides in
بالاترین
as well as
موقعیتی
in
که
the
این سال‌های
world.
اخیر داره.
It has enjoyed the
ما می‌خوایم
highest
مشکل رو حل
level
کنیم.
of
ما می‌خوایم
status, so to
گفتگوی
say, in
ما
recent years.
منجر
We
بشه
want
به
to unknot
حل یه
the
مشکل.
problems that exist so that we can
واقعاً
arrive at a
خانم
mutual
کلینتون
solution
در
here.
ایران
What I'm
می‌خواد
saying
از
here
مخالفین
is that
دولت
is it
حمایت
right,
کنه.
Ms. Clinton, of Ms.
این کار
Clinton to
خوبیه.
support those who oppose the Iranian
چه حسنی
government?
داره؟
What does it
یه
serve?
دولت قانونیه.
What's I mean, we are
بعد
speaking
هی
of a
اخبار
government that is
غیرواقعی. من
legal.
نمی‌دونم کی بهشون
Now,
اطلاعات
she also
میده.
seems to use fabricated
ملت ایران
information that
75
others provide her. I
میلیون
wonder who those others are.
این ملت
Remember that
متمدنه.
Iran is a country of 75
ملت
million
تاریخیه.
civilized people, a
یعنی
nation with a
ملت
deep
ایران
history.
می‌پذیره
Do you
که
think that that
دیکتاتوری
sort
باشه
of
در
a
ایران؟
nation
توهین
can
ملت
possibly accept
خانم کلینتون
dictatorship from
متوجه نیست.
abroad
این حرف‌ها ایشون
imposed
وقتی
on
تلویزیون ایران
it? When
پخش می‌کنه،
her statements
مردم
are
ایران
broadcast on
بدشون
Iranian
میاد از اون.
television, the Iranian people
ناراحت
start
میشن.
disliking her. They
عکس
become
العمل نشون
unhappy
میدن.
over what the United
بعضی
States
تو تظاهرات
represents.
به
They
دولت
react,
آمریکا
they participate in demonstrations
اعتراض
and
میکنن.
protests against the American
همون ملت
government.
ایرانه.
They too represent the Iranian
سپاه
people.
مال ملت
And the
ایرانه.
IRGC belongs to the
ارتش مال
people.
ملت
The
ایرانه.
army belongs, it's part and
مال
parcel
ملتن،
of our
فرزندان
country.
ملتن.
They are the children of our country. They belong to the country.
یعنی خانم کلینتون
So is Ms. Clinton trying to say that 75 million people are all military people? They're all members of the IRGC? I mean, what sort of an outlook is that? Now, she made a claim, but she couldn't prove it. Now she's making a new claim. This doesn't change anything about us. It's not like it harms us more or less. Allow me to just say one sentence. I am really meaning this as a friend. I mean it. If I wanted to speak as an enemy, I would have encouraged her to keep on doing what she is. I would have said, good job, keep on going. But that, because I know that does not serve the United States, but I know that this is harming your status in the world. If I wanted to be insincere with you, I should have said, Ms. Clinton, she's right, just tell her to go on. Let's tell her to go on, please. Wow, what she said was so important. But please, these are elementary statements. We're quite surprised. She's a university-educated woman. How can she possibly speak without having enough information?
What stands in the way, in your judgment, to a better relationship between Iran and the United States, between President Obama and President Ahmadinejad? How do you make it better? That's the question.
If you recall, last year we talked about this subject.
We did indeed, yes. And it's a year later.
Do you remember that when Mr. Obama was voted into office, I sent him a message?
Right.
I congratulated him. Okay. What should he have done, logically? He should have at least responded.
But there's a question, did he respond to...
He did not respond.
To anyone, though? Did he respond to the supreme leader of Iran, Mr. Ayatollah Khamenei? Did he?
I come into the room and I say hello to you. You can turn around and say hello to the other person next to me?
I hear you. Okay, point's well taken. The point's well taken.
Right?
No, the point's well taken. No, the point's well taken. What do you want him to say to you? What do you want him to say to you today?
The Supreme Leader is dear to us. I am not bothered that he responded to the Supreme Leader. But what I am saying is that he did not give a response to my message.
What would you have liked for him to have said, number one, and what would you like for him to say today? Today.
You see, what we saw happen during the presidential elections here in the United States was that the differences between Mr. Obama and Ms. Clinton was primarily over foreign policy. That's what we could see about it. Ms. Clinton was making a different foreign policy pronouncement than Mr. Obama, which seemed to contradict each of one another. So isn't it strange that Ms. Clinton has become the Secretary of State of Mr. Obama? Administration, and of us even more so, to expect that things should improve given that. So I think there's a problem here. The Iranians always want to talk. Last year, do you remember I said at the UN General Assembly, I'm prepared to speak with Mr. Obama. I announced it, but he didn't respond. This year, too, I said the same thing. I said that I would be prepared to meet with Mr. Obama in the General Assembly. This is a great opportunity. After 30 years of conflict between the two countries, of clashes and disagreements, to talk, that's a huge breakthrough. I've said many times that the American policy in Afghanistan is wrong. It doesn't serve you, and we're even willing to help you with it. Is there any more help? And we want to do it on a pro bono basis, by the way. We don't want anything in return. We don't want a remuneration. We don't want a political status. We don't want anything from you in return.
I hear you, but there is enormous concern today. And I'm telling you, it's not just in the United States, and you know this. In a recent interview with Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of Britain, you talk to other Arab leaders. They're concerned about nuclear intentions. They're concerned about how do you take this conflict and make it better. Give us a roadmap. Give us a roadmap.
Mr. Rose, the agreement was that we would not get angry here. You got angry.
No, I didn't. I did not.
We're just having a conversation here. If we want to unearth the cases and go dig into history, I think it won't be to America's benefit even more than Iran. The more we expand the issues, the worse the U.S. problems are. Neither Hezbollah nor Hamas have left their own territory to go somewhere else. They're active in their own territories, in their own homelands.
I'm asking you, those are the things that are part of the issues.
Gaza, allow me.
Right.
Gaza. I mean, when we talk of subject, it's fine. We can do it. I'm not saying let's not open these cases, but at the same time, at least we have to make an effort to clarify things. Hamas and Hezbollah are in their own territories in that. Mr. Tony Blair should be put on trial. And on top of that, he thinks he should have make a statement. Of course, he wants to sow the seeds of discord to sell more arms. Mr. Tony Blair held Mr. Bush's hand and said a lie that there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and allowed the United States to enter into a deadlock that led to the death of both American troops as well as the Iraqi people, and basically created instability in the region. And on top of that, Mr. Blair's statement should now be considered as a real statement and taken seriously. This is what we object to. We think that those who go to Iraq and create a war that leads to the death and casualty of over 1 million people, where are they? If they are put on trial once, nobody would dare do these mistakes again. Allow me. Last year, I told you something. I like to repeat it. I'd like to repeat it every 5 years that I've seen you, I think. You see, in Iraq, we see a country that's friends with Iran. Our people are friends.
Friends with the United States as well.
We can find out if they can be friends with the United States.
They are friends with the United States.
Right now, they don't like to be friends with the United States, and we have to ask ourselves why.
The Iraqis, you're saying.
The region. I'm speaking of the people of Iraq. Can you just bear with me, please? People in Iran and Iraq marry each other. Many Iranians were born in Iraq. Many Iraqis were born in Iran. Every year, 5 million people cross the borders between the two countries. Insecurity in Iraq, therefore, who do you think would it impact first and foremost? And if it had security, who do you think it would impact first? Now, on top of that, is it the American troops or the Iranian troops that are in the borders of Iraq? Is it us stationing our troops along the borders, or is it the United States that has troops on both sides of our borders, on the east and west? I mean, these equations are fundamentally wrong, and I think that if we can sincerely sit down and talk, these can all be talked about. Mr. Obama could come here. I'd gladly, sit down with him and talk. We can find some solutions. I don't want to go back to the past. I look to the future. And I think that there's this problem that we need to resolve, and we have to address the root cause of the problem. What is it? What is the problem in Afghanistan? Where does it come from? Why isn't it resolved?
Afghanistan is not the root problem of the conflict between the United States and Iran. You know that. It's not. It is not the root problem.
Then what is it? What is the root cause of the conflict between Iran and the United States? What is our problem then? Can you tell me? What is our problem? What is our problem? You tell me.
I'll tell you.
Did we sanction the United States?
No.
Did we cut our ties with the United States? Did we issue resolutions against the United States? What have we done? What have we done here? We haven't done anything.
The United States believes that you want to acquire a nuclear weapon. That's one. That's a problem. That's a problem. They believe that you stand in the way of Israelis and Palestinians coming to an agreement. They believe you support, certain activities by Hamas and Hezbollah in terms of financing and other things. How do you step forward from those things? It's not Afghanistan, and you know it's not Afghanistan.
You see, the answers are clear. When there's a claim made by the U.S. government, if it's true, we'll accept it. But
وقتی که آقای بوش میاد
when
در
Mr.
عراق
Bush
1 میلیون نفر رو میکشه
kills 1 million people
آیا
in Iraq,
صدایی در آمریکا در میاد که حقوق بشر
does
نقض شد؟
anybody talk about human rights violations there?
تناقضه
I mean,
تبعیضه
there seems to be a major
Oh,
contradiction
it is.
here. It's a selective memory that I'm speaking of here. And when it becomes selective, it becomes this not honest. And when it is dishonest, it cannot be accepted. So you see, we have to speak of the mistakes that have been made. And once we speak of these mistakes, we'll move forward. 30 years ago, around the same time, Saddam attacked us. Back then, there was no speak of Hamas or Hezbollah. They didn't exist. And there was no such talk of a nuclear bomb. And why did the U.S. government choose Saddam over us and choose to support Saddam against us? What did we do? And it went full force behind Saddam and his war against us. It's quite clear. I mean, now, if you go to China and Japan or Africa or South America and ask kids in, elementary school what the problem between Iran and the United States is. Is it the nuclear bomb that perhaps Iran want to build? And over 80% would say, no, it's a game. Come on, it's a game. The United States is against Iran. Iran was under its, supervision, under its control, and now it's a free country, and the Americans don't want to see that. One day they choose to defend Saddam. The other day, next day they talk about human rights. The next day they talk about nuclear issue. I mean, that's the bottom line. I'm telling you as a friend. That's the bottom line.
But when I read from people like Ayatollah Yazdi, who said allow demonstrations, guarantee their safety. That's somebody that you respect. Yes? You do. I read from people like Ahmed Tavakoli, who says that some of the economic numbers are lies. I read, these are Iranians. And so I'm coming here trying to understand Iran. And that's part of what I read.
یعنی شما از آقای توکلی و آقای مصباح یزدی کد میارید.
Do you bring quoting Mr. Tawakkoli or Mr. Mصباح Yazdi to say what? Mr. Tawakkoli is a member of a parliament. He has every right to speak his mind. Don't your members of Congress have the right to speak their mind in the United States? I'm sure they probably do, huh? Well, some are against something and some are not.
But what I would love to hear
you... Not a problem here. I don't read many of the statements they make, in fact, I tell you. I don't read them. Because in Iran, everybody has an opinion. And everybody's free to express their opinions. There are like so many newspapers representing 70 million opinions at a time. It doesn't matter. Everybody should be respected, of course. But what they say is their opinion, and it's not evidence. Let me tell you one thing, and you are connected with the American authorities, so you should relay this to them. If they think that with these statements, but just remind them, I'm not saying, remind them, I'm not saying connected, but you have access to them. We don't, our reporters don't have access to them to ask questions, so perhaps you should convey them. They don't let our reporters sit down with them as we allow your reporters to come and sit down with us. Just because you have a lot of freedom here, they don't allow them to, because the media is quite free here. I mean, come on, we know what we're talking about.
I agree with you. They should sit down with your reporters.
Very good, very good. That's good. I want to say as a friend, if you can help them hear this any way you are able to, as long as they resort to these methods, they're not going to succeed with us. They have to start respecting the Iranians, the Iranian people, their choices, their system of government, their legal system. They have to start respecting it. They simply don't know how to show respect. The Iranian people are a big nation. They're an enlightened people. They know what to choose. They don't need Ms. Clinton to represent them. The people of Iran have paid a hefty price for freedom, democracy, progress, and they certainly don't need Ms. Clinton's advice on it. The more advice she gives, it serves me, I'm telling you. The more she gets into this, Ahmadinejad's popularity rises, both in Iran and in the world. It doesn't, benefit her but me.
Okay.
But it doesn't resolve the problem again. If she wants to resolve her problem with the countries of the region in the Middle East and with Iran, then she has to change her methods. She has to respect the nations in the region. They're people too. They understand. They have a mind of their own. They have the ability to make choices. Nobody needs to pick choices for them. I don't understand. I mean, whenever she talks, I mean, okay, fine, she can talk. I don't mind. She can talk if she likes. Everybody does, and I have a lot of patience for it. You know, in Iran, I can tell you in the newspapers there are so many dissidents and opponents expressing their disagreements with the government. Across the Middle East, you won't find a single government like Iran that is always attacked and criticized as much as it is inside Iran. I have a lot of patience. I read all through them. But I can tell you that what she has chosen as a method is not going to resolve the problem. If she wants to resolve the problem, she has to respect us. We've said, okay, let's have talks in the 5+1, but really talk under equal conditions, as equals, so that we can arrive at an agreement. But not for them to issue a resolution first and then now sit down and talk and accept whatever we tell you. That's not called a negotiation, by the way. If you have a referendum in Iran, even 1% of the people would not be willing to sit down with Ms. Clinton and have a talk with her under these conditions. But if it were equal, if it was respect there, I've said many times we were prepared to sit down and talk. We're prepared to talk. Unfortunately, U.S. administrations do not take advantage of the opportunities that are presented to them. I don't understand why. I fail to understand why. The opportunities that Iran provided America have been numerous. They have to at some point start taking advantage of it. In Iraq, right now, if a strong government is formed, it will serve everyone, the United States, Iran, and the entire region. They shouldn't prevent that. They shouldn't prevent the formation of a strong government. They have to assist in it. At least they can say we went to Iraq with all these death tolls, with all these destructions to infrastructure. In the end of the day, we have a strong government to show. As a case example, they don't understand that this serves their interest, but they don't. They just don't. Let Iraq have a popular government. It serves you. It allows the U.S. government to show the world that it went to Iraq for a reason, because it created a strong government that is able to help with the development of Iraq. It will change your image in the world. But if you start intervening, the very Iraqi officials who talk with your officials leave the room and say, we feel pressured by them. We feel they're imposing on us. They don't tell them in their face because they're coercive in their measures. They come out and tell their people, oh, we feel pressured by the Americans. That doesn't really serve America. They have to improve their ways, and believe me, things will resolve much faster than you think.
On the question of the human rights questions, if I gave you a list of people that people have asked me about, would you have someone look into it?
Certainly, yes, why not? I represent our people. If anybody violates somebody's right, I will basically make sure they know. Just 2 months ago, a reporter in the judicial process basically had a right that was violated. The reporter wrote a letter to me, and I examined the letter, and I realized that the reporter was right. And so I wrote a letter and reminded the judiciary of the mistake, because it's my constitutional right and prerogative. And I told them that they have to revise the law that violates the reporter's right. You see, the way we look at our system of government is different than perhaps in the United States. We feel the government must, in the end of the day, serve the people to sustain itself. We are not a capitalist system. I am not the CEO of a company to serve that company. I've never had a company. I've never been a shareholder in any company or a stakeholder. So what is my role? That of a serviceman. So, you know, it's a kind of a different mentality from a capitalist system. We have to understand the differences in our systems of governance, to explore our behaviors, and then to come to an agreement with one another and resolve problems.
That's a perfect place to end this conversation. I thank you for taking time. We went way over, but I thank you very much. And you have invited me to come to Tehran, yes?
Yes, anytime you'd like to come to Tehran. Most American reporters are free to come to Tehran, and they can meet with me as well. I hope that this opportunity will also be given to Iranian reporters.
Thank you very much. Pleasure. A conversation with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran, from his hotel near the United Nations, where he will speak at the General